the balance between good and evil has been, over thousands of years, a topic of inspiration for philosophers, great thinkers, poets, etc. We tend to scowl on the exploiters of the world and praise the cooperators. We may do so because people who perform cooperative actions benefit the society, and so they may potentially benefit us in a way. Our admiration may also come from our upbringing. We can be, to some extent, taught by the society to admire cooperators, as during our upbringing we are presented with models of exemplary behaviors, which we are encouraged to follow. In some cases, cooperation may also be deemed to show superior strength of the individual, who, by helping others, shows that he is capable of sparing some of his resources. Not all people agree in this admiration of cooperators. There is a famous quote by one of Polish writers, Jarosław Abramov: "Kto ma miękkie serce, musi mieć twardą dupę i liczyć się, że w nią dostanie." Now, allow myself to roughly translate the statement, and this is what I came up with. One who has a soft heart must have a hard bottom, so that he is prepared to get kicked in it. Now, I've heard this statement so many times in my life, spoken with such conviction, even by eminent political figures, I mind you, that it seems that it is accepted by many people to be a universal truth. Although I am by no means accepting the statement with full conviction, I am forced to give it some credit. Certainly, a person or an individual who spends his effort to contribute to society or to a group is to some extent vulnerable to being exploited by the people within the group. However, I'll never believe that having a soft heart is a weakness. To the contrary, I believe that cooperation and caring about other people's welfare can actually be a strength, even in terms of survival. But I don't want you to take my word for it. I want to show it to you with game theory. So I don't know if you've heard about game theory. It is a field of study which analyzes the success of various strategies which can be employed in a given interaction between living organisms. The most famous example in game theory is the prisoner's dilemma. In the prisoner's dilemma, two prisoners committed for the same crime are interrogated separately by the police. During the interrogation, each prisoner faces a choice to either confess their crime or to stay silent. The offer given to each prisoner by the police is such that no matter what the other player does, it is always advantageous for each prisoner to confess to the police and thus betray their partner in crime to lower their own sentence. Interestingly, if both players chose to cooperate with each other and they both remain silent, they would both be better off, as the police wouldn't have enough evidence to convict either of them for all of their crimes. So the prisoner's dilemma can be translated to countless examples of instances where a player faces a choice to either cooperate with the other player or to exploit him. The interactions between the two strategies can be generalized as follows. Whenever a cooperator meets another cooperator, they both benefit from mutual cooperation, and so they both receive some reward. This can be visualized in terms of I help you and you help me, or I scratch your back and you'll scratch mine. In the case when a cooperator meets an exploiter, the cooperator is exploited and suffers a loss, while the exploiter walks off with a reward which is higher than the reward resulting from mutual cooperation. An example of exploiter here would be a seagull who steals a donut away from a hungry gentleman who actually paid for the donut, but will never benefit from eating it. So if our seagull was a cooperator, then it would pay its share in the cost of the donut, and the seagull and the gentleman would both split the donut between them equally, would both be happy. However, it benefits the seagull to be sneaky and steal the whole donut and fly away. Now, obviously, the seagull can't help its behavior, but if we change the word seagull for the word thief, then the whole point stands. Now, in the last case, when an exploiter meets an exploiter, the interaction between them can be summed up as spiteful. So neither of them is benefiting from the interaction and may, in fact, suffer a loss. So in our battle between good and evil, when we place a cooperator against an exploiter, who's going to win? Well, it's going to be the exploiter, right? It is true that in the case of isolated interaction between two types of players, one cooperator doesn't stand a chance against an exploiter. But does this mean that cooperation is naive? That it is a weaker strategy, inferior to exploiting another player? Well, yeah, in the case of isolated interactions, when we have only two players, then yeah, I suppose it is a weaker strategy. But luckily, in our population, the interactions are usually not limited to two individuals at a time. More commonly, the interactions are spatial, and so many people interact simultaneously with a number of other individuals. So in my research, I studied a model, first created by Martin Nowak and Robert May in 1992. So their model is a two-dimensional variant of the prisoner's dilemma. So in this model, what they did was put the exploiters and cooperators on a two-dimensional space. And they let all the players interact with one another according to the same interactions as in the prisoner's dilemma. So the only difference here was that instead of interacting with only one player at a time, each player was allowed to interact with 8 other players in their neighborhood in one step. So the success of each player was determined by the total reward that he was able to get from all of his neighbors. And if he scored less than any of his neighbors, then he would have to give up his space in the game. He became eliminated, and the successful neighbor would take over his space in the game. So when I implemented the model and let it run, this is what I got for one set of parameters. So we see that after the simulation goes on, here the cooperators are represented by the color blue, and the exploiters are red. So we see that actually cooperators survive and actually outcompete the exploiters. So we see that the tables have turned. By removing the isolation of the interactions, we actually give an opportunity for cooperators to gain some reward from others of their type and thus win against exploiters. So this is a nice result. That's what we want. When we increase the reward for exploiters a little bit, then we see a little kaleidoscope dance between the cooperators and exploiters. So here we see that although both strategies are somewhat successful, by increasing the reward for exploiters, we visibly decreased the number of cooperators in our system. So if we keep increasing the reward for exploiters, then we finally reach a point where we see a total extinction of cooperators in our system. So yes, it is possible in the face of very aggressive exploiters to wipe out all cooperators. Interestingly, the opposite is not true. So it is not possible for cooperators to exterminate an exploiter. In the case of one exploiter surrounded by cooperators, both the exploiter and the cooperators have an equal number of cooperators around them. So that since the exploiter's reward from meeting a cooperator is always higher than the reward the cooperators gain from each other, his reward is always going to be higher than the reward of his neighbors. And so that he will happily be able to hold his place surrounded by cooperators and live off the cooperator's resources indefinitely. So now I have shown you how the strategy to cooperate prevails in the face of invasion by selfish players for a wide range of scenarios. Now, obviously, this model assumes that the players are wired or programmed to play one or the other strategy. And we have to admit that humans are much more complex than that. We are able to adjust our strategies according to some decision-making process. So each time we make a decision to either contribute or to take something from the society, and in that moment, we identify ourselves with one or the other strategy. The human's power of reasoning has visibly led to an increase in cooperation in our population. So by introducing government-paid jobs like social care, teaching, or firefighting, we promote cooperation in our population. Another form of promoting cooperation is introducing punishment for cheating. So we can send to prison or we can fine people for breaking the law. These practices are essentially designed to exclude a selfish player from the society. The power of the law to promote cooperation is limited, so that some unethical practices are not punishable by law, or the punishment is much smaller than the potential reward. In that way, a certain balance is maintained between cooperation and exploitation in our society. The model I've shown you supports the idea that both selfish and selfless interactions must coexist in the real world. So in that way, kind of the battle between the good and evil side of our characters is never ending, with neither side able to win over the other. To conclude, this model can be also used to argue that cooperation and selfless actions are not naive. Not only do these actions benefit a whole population or a whole species, but also they can be successful behavioral strategies in each individual's quest to prosper. This is all due to the fact that cooperation, by strengthening the whole group, makes the whole group, strengthening the whole group makes it more resistant to invasion by selfish players, and so may actually become a successful survival strategy. I believe in the light of these results, the quote by Yaroslav Abramov may be modified to, "One who has a soft heart must surround himself with others alike, so that they can fight their adversaries together." Thank you.